Okay, we're going to get started. This is Debbie West. I'm the host of Lost Knowledge on Revolution Radio. My co-host is Michael Hathaway. We air every Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Time on Revolution Radio Studio A. Our show covers topics about cosmic consciousness, Earth's ascension, a lot of paranormal subjects, and how our dreams also affect our reality, and how our consciousness as a species has been expanding dramatically, particularly since 2012. So I'd like to introduce our guests today. Our guests are Trish and Rob Macgregor. They, between the two of them, have published, 50 or 60 books, just an incredible library of information. They have been professional writers for 30 years. Rob has written books you've heard about, probably the Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, and 6 other Indiana Jones novels, which have sold millions and millions of copies. Trish's 42 books have been translated into 20 different languages. Their latest book, which I have in my hand here, is called Aliens in the Backyard. And we'll talk about what that means. The book itself will really get into this topic of UFOs, ETs, abductions, synchronicity, and a little information that you might not know about regarding a lot of this phenomena that's been talked about recently. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Rob and Trish Macgregor to Lost Knowledge. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks so much, Debbie.
Thanks for inviting us.
And I'd like to introduce you to Michael Hathaway, my co-host in New Hampshire.
Hi there.
He's near the White Mountains. Lucky you.
Oh, I have, yes. If you've been up there, and I know that you've talked about, knowing the people at some of the abductions at Betty Hill, and I knew the artist that did the pictures for her book, but that's another story, so we want to get into the backyard. So,
the dogs are going nuts here. Sorry.
Dogs and aliens in the backyard, both.
That's what they're
So before the show, Rob and Trish and I spoke briefly, and we talked about synchronicity, and they've written so many books on synchronicity, Synchronicity on the Other Side, Secrets of Synchronicity, the Synchronicity Journal, many more. Yeah, it's a grand theme that runs through their writing. And Rob wanted to talk a little bit about the synchronicity of what's going on today across the country on this very momentous day, as children are coming forward in asking us to really pay attention and do something about gun violence. So, Rob, can you talk a little bit about that synchronicity?
Yes. In our first book on synchronicity is The 7 Secrets of Synchronicity. One of the 7 secrets was that there's global synchronicities. These synchronicities happen during these global events, mass events that affect mass consciousness.
It's when the universe seems to be addressing humanity as a collective.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about a couple of these related to these mass shootings. And the Aurora, Colorado mass murders bridge the gap between fiction and reality. Just before the showing of Dark Knight Rises, a trailer of a movie called Gangster Squad was shown, and it ended with a mass shooting in a theater. And so gangsters walked right through the movie screen and opened fire on the crowd. So within minutes, that fiction turned into real life when an actual gunman came in, opened fire. It seems so coincidental, so synchronous.
It was synchronous.
Yes, that many people in the audience initially thought the shooting was part of a promotion for the Batman movie, which it was just the opening day of the movie. And so beyond that, there's a scene when you can see the name Aurora at the top of a building in the Dark Knight Rises, and that happened.
And the name Sandy Hook is written on a map in the movie.
Right. 6 months later, and like 1,500 miles away, there was another mass shooting, and that was at the school, Sandy Hook Elementary School. And in that movie, Dark Knight Rises, that name, Aurora, appears on a map in that movie. So those are startling synchronicities.
It's almost like these scriptwriters tuned into something.
How do you compare that to a collective unconsciousness?
Wait. Let's get back to the beginning of this. Today, we have an uprising of young people, students across the world who are asking us to protect them in their schools from gun violence. You call this maybe a global synchronicity.
It's a mass event because it's
a mass event, and are they spearheading this shift in consciousness where we will put down guns and stop selling guns and change what we're doing?
It sure feels that way to me. And even just today, while we were watching this, I noted a synchronicity. A couple of these Parkland students were in history class studying the Holocaust when this kid came in and started shooting. Mm-hmm. Now, how weird is that?
Yeah, they're studying the Holocaust, and suddenly they had a mini Holocaust
of their own
right in their school. And also that very day of the Parkland High School shooting, the very next morning, Donald Trump was busy tweeting and blaming the students and the teachers for not doing anything about catching this kid early. Well, it turns out that was the 1-year anniversary of Donald Trump signing a bill into law, making it easier for mentally ill people to buy guns.
Mm-hmm. So this is a big mass event. Yeah, this is a huge mass event, and it's something, that we as a collective, I think Michael was just asking about, as a collective consciousness are starting to, to really pay attention to, right? Because this can be the shift of consciousness that we've been waiting for, and it's all amazingly being spearheaded by these young, what do we call it, indigo or crystalline children who have just had enough. Yeah, right. They see the new consciousness unfolding on the planet, and they have a vision for what lives, what soul evolution, which is what lives are, what soul evolution should be all about.
Yeah, we don't want them to be known as the mass shooting generation.
No,
they're clearly not. Yeah.
I don't want to say too much, but I have a granddaughter that age who at 7 or 8, when Santa Claus asked her what she wanted happiness for all the children in the world. And I knew that she was special, but she's just one of a whole generation. Today is total affirmation of what I've seen in that group.
Yeah, I mean, this is different, because these kids are articulate. They are able to describe what they felt during the shooting while this whole thing was going on, and they're ticked off. There's real anger and angst behind this whole movement.
Yeah, we were watching the speeches that were going on on the mall in Washington D.C., and there's not a single adult talking.
No,
there was a couple performing, but artists, but they were all high school kids, 15, 16, 17, and then there were a couple 11-year-olds that were also very
articulate.
Very articulate. Yeah. More articulate than me.
So if you pull that back into the big picture, how do you interpret the events that are going on now as far as synchronicity goes? And where do you see it going?
I think it's a paradigm shift. Everybody's talked for years about a shifting paradigm, but it seems in the last few years we've kind of gone backwards as a society. But if this movement continues, this could be the thing that's the tipping point, I feel.
I agree. Deb's been talking about this shift for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're in the middle of this wonderful cosmic ascension, and let's try to go over some more of the material that you guys have put out, because it's all very amazing. This book, Aliens in the Backyard, for instance, it really talks a lot about people, personal experiences with UFOs and encounters that people have had. Can you tell us how this book came about and how you did the research for it?
Okay. The central story that ignited the book was related to a man in rural Quebec. He lived about 45 minutes outside of Montreal. He had an experience at 5 a.m. one morning after getting up. And he was a person who is kind of a religious person who never had any interest in UFOs. He thought it was something that was in the movies and part of Hollywood. And he told me once that if these were real, these UFOs and aliens, well, the U.S. military would have told us about this long ago, wouldn't they have? And I thought that was kind of a naive comment. But so he really had no interest or much knowledge on the subject. But he had an experience at 5 a.m. where he let his dog out the door, out the back door, and the dog was acting for a couple hours, had acted very strange. It jumped up on the bed, which it never does, making noise. And then when he wanted the dog to go out, he had to push him with his foot for the dog to even go outside. So then he steps outside himself and sees these strange lights in his property. His backyard is adjacent to a farmer's field, and there was these beams. I think he said there were 9 of them that were shooting down from the darkness above, and there was some kind of energy swirling around, and like it's sucking up something from the earth, swirling around, pulling it up. And he was just fascinated by what he was watching, and it seemed like these beams were moving closer to him as he was watching. So he went inside and woke up his wife to tell her to come out and see this. So she came out, and she was looking at it with him, and they were talking about wondering what it was. And suddenly there is a saucer-shaped craft that comes into their backyard next to their weeping willow tree, and it's vertical. Rather,
like a coin on edge.
Like a coin on edge, coming between the house and the willow tree, coming right towards them. He turns to reach for the dog, and the dog is suddenly surrounded with a gold light, and that's the last thing he remembers. Suddenly he finds himself in the shower, taking a shower. He has no idea how he got there, what happened. His wife is sound asleep in bed. And no missing time, though. He just continues on with his day, goes to work, closes the door of his office. He's an engineer for an aeronautical corporation in Montreal. Closes his door and just breaks down. And after that, he had a very, very tough time. And so he went home, and then he went over to his next door neighbor's house. He didn't know the next door neighbors very well because they weren't very close to him. It would be like a block away, walking over to them, and he knew they got up early too. And he said, "Did you see anything?" He knocked on the door and talked to the man. "Did you see anything this morning?" And he kind of shakes his head. "No, what are you talking about?" And then his wife calls from the background and says, what was the name that we used for him? He doesn't want his real name.
Oh, Charles.
Yeah, Charles. Charles, did you see a UFO this morning? And he's startled. And what are you talking about? I saw something. I don't know what it was. And she said, "I bet I know you saw a UFO." And he said, "Is that what you saw?" And he said, "No." She said, "No, but 2 weeks ago, this crazy cousin I have who says he's a medium called me up and says, 'You're going to see a UFO in your backyard in a couple of weeks.' I didn't, but you did." And he just turned around, said, thanked him, and walked away, and very puzzled by this. And then after that, everywhere he would go, he would run into this couple. He would go to a grocery store, a restaurant, a shopping center 20 miles away from the house, and there they would be. And they said, "Are you following us, Charles?" And I said, "I thought you were following me." It's all these synchronicities. So he went to a bookstore in Montreal, and he rarely went to bookstores because his job involves reading all the time during the day. But he went to this bookstore, went to the New Age section, and pulled a book about synchronicity off the bookshelf and took it home and started reading. So then he did.
He Googled the authors.
He Googles the authors, and what comes up is an image of a UFO shooting beams down into a field, and he said that's exactly what I saw. And these people put this image up, and so he said he had to contact those people. Well, those people were us, and the book was 7 Secrets of Synchronicity,
which it sold in French.
Yeah, and there's a French. He picked up a French edition, and so that's how we met him. That was the beginning of the initiation of that book.
And the weird thing, we did, I think it was 9 posts on his story, and with each post, we got all these government hits from the FBI, the NSA, you name it, they came on looking for information, Homeland Security. Then the Royal Canadian Mounted Police spent 8 hours on our blog one day doing whatever.
So somebody had been assigned to research this case in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And so and I mentioned that to Charles, and I said, I get this image of cops on horses chasing UFOs. And he laughs and says, no, they're more like the FBI. They're not on horses anymore. Hello? You know what? I don't think
you're kidding. Hello?
We lost the call.
It says coming current call.
What happened there?
Did
we lose that?
Yeah. Hello?
What happened?
Okay. Hey, hi, MacGregors. Are you still there?
Yeah.
How much of it did you get?
Well, I don't know, but I'm sure it was all wonderful. I lost my power for 1 second. Michael, are you back?
I'm back too.
Oh, sorry. So I hope you guys told everybody some really interesting things about.
Yes.
Was that recorded, I hope?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. Oh. I think the aliens interfered.
Well, I'll tell you, reading your material, it astounded me to see that a National Geographic poll says that 36% of Americans believe now that aliens exist.
Yeah. There's even more recent ones from 2017 that have, I think, at 52% now.
But they believe in some facet of the paranormal.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of people that you've talked to personally have had these stories, and they've had these events happen to them. Is that right?
Yeah. See, when we started a blog in 2009 on synchronicity, and I guess in 2009. People weren't talking much about synchronicity or about any of the things that we're interested in or that we write about. So we started getting all these people on the blog who didn't have anybody else to talk to about their weird experiences. And that's how a number of these books were launched. Especially in the backyard. So
when we talk about this alien, I like to refer to it as the cosmic cultures. So they're able to contact us. Are we able to contact them?
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, we just met in February. We spent a couple days with Whitley Strieber. He had come to the spiritualist community in Central Florida near where our daughter lives. And he feels... Was
it Casadega?
Yes, it was.
Right,
I love that place.
It was Casadega.
Yeah, he had this through another third party... an alien contact said, go to Casadega, and he didn't even know what Casadega was. Yeah. And so he had to look it up.
And when he emailed us, what was interesting is I had just taught an astrology workshop up there, and we were on our way back.
Yeah, the day before, we had been in Casadega, and he contacted us because it was in Florida and asked us if we knew where Casadega was.
And could we meet him?
We just been there. So we met him a couple weeks later there.
But he believes that this whole alien phenomena is also connected to the dead, which he may be right.
Can I just ask one thing on this? What's been going through my head is its frequencies. And is this all this paranormal? Each brain frequency is totally different with each person. So the way we receive, there's no one who gets it the same. At least that's what I think at this moment. Is that a fact that some people are more open to this being in tune with all of this than others?
It's just like paranormal phenomena, psychic abilities. I think everybody has it to some degree. It depends on your focus, your interest, and
how receptive you are.
Exactly.
And they're finding that, like brain injuries, so forth, life-altering events actually bring it more into focus.
Right, with people who have been struck by lightning.
NDEs.
Right. And throughout history, this has been the case for shamans, which shamanism goes back at least 10,000 years. The shamans were people who are not happy campers who have had some kind of brain injury or struck by lightning, or usually, and so that it's almost like they had been selected somehow for this role in the community.
So yeah, go ahead, because I got so many questions. I could talk forever. Go ahead.
Well, I want to get to this book again, Aliens in the Backyard. In the book, you talk about Earth changes and predictions from the Native American and Hopi, and these predictions are not anything new. I mean, we have gotten them also from Nostradamus and the Mayans, the Mayan calendar. What do you think of these predictions? I mean, what do you think might be happening?
Well, for one thing, we discovered is there are people that we called planetary empaths, and some of them have been abductees, but not all of them. And they seem to pick up physical symptoms maybe days or weeks before there's some sort of planetary event, an earthquake or, an eruption, or even sometimes a mass event like this, like the Parkland shooting was, or like the Paris bombing. So I think these people, if somebody could help them pinpoint where this event would occur, that could be really useful.
You're talking about the
planetary empaths,
empaths, right? Yeah.
So as a society, though, I mean, are we? Is the Earth? I mean, as it's described in one of your chapters, there's going to be Earth shaking, and sort of like this huge cleansing of the planet. Have you heard much about that?
Actually, we haven't. This is one of the reasons we're going to leave South Florida. We had Hurricane Irma. Was really a scary hurricane for us. We didn't evacuate, but most of the state, the entire state was actually evacuated during Irma. I've lived in Florida off and on since 1963, and hurricanes have never been this violent or have broken this many records. I mean, there's something changing for sure in the climate. And Florida seems to be one of the 0 points, South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Edgar Casey predicted these Earth changes decades ago.
But he was off. They've all been off on their timing.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing.
I've look at that and I see the timing coming in. I know that 96, 98 or so when he was talking about the shift, and I agree. Maybe his timing is right and the Earth timing is off. The calendar.
Yeah, that's true.
Changed.
That's a good point. Well, I mean, we talked a lot about this with Whitley Strieber, too, because he had written The Coming Global Superstorm with, what was that guy's name? Coast to Coast guy. Well, anyway. With
George Norrie.
No, not George Norrie. It was the one before.
Bell.
Art Bell.
Art Bell, yeah.
And that became the movie The Day After Tomorrow. And he really feels that the climate, that it's changing. We are now in the midst of the change.
Yeah. And Whitley is very interesting that he has this probe that's inside of his ear, and it's
an implant from
an implant that he uses, that he doesn't want it removed. He uses for communication and getting messages, and so it was a interesting time spending a couple of days with him.
So he talked about an implant that he received from an experience he had with
in the 80s.
UFO.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And interesting, he remembers that implant, and it was military people it was humans who put that in him. So
that really kind of begs the question, well, how closely are humans working with ETs? You know, the military, for instance.
And we have some stories about that in that book too.
Oh yeah, what is it? What does the stories tell us about that?
Go ahead, Trish.
One of the women who was one of the first visitors to our blog used to be a hospice nurse, well educated, but she has been abducted since she was a kid. And in 1981, November 9th, it was cold and clear in southern Georgia, and she and her family were moving to St. Augustine. And she and her youngest son were in one of the cars, and her husband, the other two boys, were in the moving van. Now, her car was a Regency Oldsmobile sedan with a V8 454 cubic inch engine. In other words, it was big and it was powerful. So they're driving down I-75, and all of a sudden, Connie realized they're not on I-75 anymore. And I-75 is, well traveled. It was even back in 1981. And they're suddenly on some roads that aren't marked. And the next thing she knows, she comes to on the ground with her son. They're both kneeling there sobbing while three military guys
they're on a tarmac.
Yeah, on a tarmac, have assault rifles aimed at them. There are two aliens with them, grays, and there's several craft overhead. And one of the military guys is yelling at her, in other words, if you ever tell anybody this. But she was so upset, she lost the rest of what he said. Next thing she knows, she and her son are driving on these back roads again. And she can't, she's totally screwed up, totally confused about where she is. She finally finds a 7-Eleven or something, a convenience store, and goes inside and asks the woman, how do I get back to I-75? She goes, oh, you're on Warner Robins Air Force Base, and you have to get out the same way you got in. Connie said, I don't know how I got in. But anyway, she eventually found her way back out to I-75 and arrived in St. Augustine 3 hours after her husband did. Now, he was frantic. There was no cell phones in those days, nothing, no way to communicate.
He was with the truck with all the furniture ahead of...
And the other two sons.
Yeah. And they just lost track of her completely, and she arrived 3 hours later.
So how do you explain something like that? There you have military humans with grays on an Air Force base.
And we're on George Nuri's show, Coast to Coast, talking about that same story I just told about Charles in Montreal, rural Quebec. And there was a man, after that, a man from Montreal contacted us, and he said he was surprised to find out that somebody else in Quebec, in the Montreal area, has also had these experiences, because he's had a whole series of them through his life since he was a child, which he started telling me in a whole series of emails. And one of them involved being in some kind of cave-like setting where there were a number of people that were on like stretchers, but they were against the wall and strapped naked. And he was on a table, and there were military people and aliens in that setting. And I was tried to continue communicating with him, but suddenly he said, I can't talk to you anymore. I'm getting all kinds of strange calls coming in from all over the world into my phone. Nobody says anything, and I think it's because I'm talking. And,
are you guys familiar with the Grenada Treaty?
Yeah, no. I've heard that's familiar, but what are the specifics?
During President Eisenhower's presidency, there was a treaty signed between his administration and a group of ETs from Zeta Reticula, who are one of many species visiting Earth, offering technology exchange for the ability to do some genetic testing on humans.
Oh. And
you know what? That treaty is renewed every 10 years.
Oh, really? You know, here's something that's interesting that Willie told us. He feels that actually he had a thing on his website about this, a long post. He feels that the abductions are now done, that phase is done because they've gotten all the genetic material that they need in order to create a race of beings who can exist on another planet or in another solar system.
And we're gonna have Judy Carroll on the show for a second or third time, I think, in April 7th. She is a reincarnated alien Grey. If you haven't met her, her story's fascinating. And she and many other Greys will tell you that they live on in a very fascinating civilization. They live with the concept of the law of one, unity consciousness.
Oh, right. Okay.
It can be sort of like a hive mentality. It's different than what we have a lot of freedoms here that we don't always appreciate, but their civilization is very wise and loving and kind.
What's her last name?
Carol, Carroll, Judy.
Oh, Judy Carroll. Okay.
She's written about the Greys, and I think because the Greys are very misunderstood. I mean, people hear abduction stories and they're horrific, and that's not the whole story, and so they want to share more of the story. And like you say, that phase of their projection, I think, into this reality is basically completed. The advancement of the civilizations in the galactic community is really to help Earth as we manifest through these enormous changes that we're experiencing, because we're becoming fifth dimensional. So Earth is progressing into a new cosmic reality. This is what has been foretold from the Mayan calendar, is that we would ascend into a higher dimension. And as a species, those of us who resonate at this higher frequency will continue on to evolve. Others may have to evolve somewhere else.
Well, explain this to me. I'm sorry, just a quick question. If we're evolving, how did we get Trump as president? This baffles me.
Well,
I think that's baffling too. But part of that, I think, is from a duality perspective. We have to witness. We make it hard on ourselves, but we have to witness and experience our shadow, and we have to see what it is we don't want to manifest and what we don't want to feel, because it's a free will zone, right? So we have to see, feel, hear what we don't. It's like a light, dark, good, bad, love, hate kind of thing. And so that's our viewing stand right now. So we are viewing in full participation, co-creation of what we will become. In North America, really, I think this, Trish, from an astrology perspective, we have a lot to overcome, as right?
Yeah, we do. I mean, just from a human perspective too.
Always, the do-gooders. I mean, we have done our share, so we've got a lot of karmic debt in North America.
Let's take today for an example. Okay, these kids, the marvelous miracles of knowing. Now, if the experience generally in this country had not been the way it was with other administration and so forth, would they have had as much of an incentive to have the voice that they do have? So being a part of this whole movement, and we're back to synchronicities again, we try to judge things before it's all it's like a snow globe. We try to figure it all out while it's all fuzzy, and it's after we get back away from it that we begin to really see.
Yeah, it could be that we need somebody like Trump in there to lead us
away from the shadow.
Away from the shadow into something higher. Like when George W. Bush was president, we wondered, look at this guy, what is he doing? Attacking Iraq, and there's no
torture and
torture, and that led to Obama being president, and there probably would have never been a black man elected president if it wasn't for George W. Bush. I mean, he didn't live. I didn't think that Obama lived to his full potential as president, but it opened a door, and we'll see what comes next.
Well, we live in fear of love. and my choice is the light. And if I can be that light or a piece of that light, then that's where I'm at. And I see that light really shining today. Got question, Deb, if I may sneak it in here. What was the beginning of your point of your shift, and why do you think you were chosen for that? And the second part is, in your fiction writing, do you find it's truer than fiction?
Yes. One of the things we've written about in terms of synchronicity was, I think it was the fourth secret in Seven Secrets. It was called The Creative. And there are a lot of examples of creative people who have tapped into the future. In fact, we also wrote a book called Sensing the Future, which is about precognition, which is also a facet of synchronicity. But yeah, I've experienced where, back in the 90s, I wrote a book called Storm Surge. And the day I sent it off by snail mail to my editor, Hurricane Andrew was forming. 10 days later, it became a hurricane, slammed into Homestead, devastated it. And that's exactly what happened in my book. And people afterwards said, oh, well, she took Hurricane Andrew and just, used it for fiction. I said, no, that's not what happened. I wrote about the storm surge and the hurricane before Hurricane Andrew even existed. So does that answer your question?
Tuning in.
Tuning in.
Yeah, it is. Well, the other part was, why do you think you were chosen to be the light that you are, spreading this knowledge out there?
I've never really felt chosen.
Selected?
Well, I don't know. I learned about synchronicity, for instance, when I was still in college, and somebody handed me a copy of the I Ching and said, read the introduction to this. And Carl Jung wrote the introduction. I read it and I was just like totally intrigued. And that started my whole journey with synchronicity.
Yeah. Trish and I have always been interested in mysteries of the unknown, in the paranormal, and it just seemed both of us going back to our childhood, and it just seemed to be a natural thing to be interested in. But as we grew up, we found out a lot of people, maybe most people, don't have any interest. And we lived in separate worlds where we would be reading all these books and having our own personal experiences, but we were kind of isolated because everybody around each of us had no interest in it, so it wasn't easy to talk about. And then I was working as a journalist, and one day I went to meet somebody teaching at Florida International University on a story I was working on, and it turned out to be Trish, and we hit it off, and we went out to dinner and afterwards, and she asked me, do you know what synchronicity is? And so that was,
and he said he did, so I thought, okay, you're a keeper.
So that was the beginning of things. And then we found out that we both had read all these Seth books by Jane Roberts, and we didn't know anybody else who had read those books and had any interest in the Seth material. So that was another point we knew we had some common interest, and we've been pursuing it ever since together.
Aha, Deb, you there?
Oh yeah. So getting back to this aliens in the backyard. So from what from this is a short book. It's only, I don't know, 150 some pages.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed doing interviews for 5 years, Michael and I have been doing these interviews on Lost Knowledge, and people that are writing now about aliens are coming from every facet of society and every part of the globe. They're from religion. Theologists are talking about how it fits into what they talk about. Scientists, from physicists to people in psychology, what have you. It's a very big issue. And you two just wrote, this book is very fascinating, and you've put a lot of information together, plus your study of dreams and synchronicity and the paranormal. What do you really think is happening? Are there all of these other cosmic civilizations who are interacting in and out of our dimension and in their own dimensions that we just somehow don't even acknowledge or know that they exist?
Well, that's a possibility, and we're making connections. But one of the things I want to mention about this, though, is that on a deeper level, we're all interconnected. Everything is interconnected.
The whole cosmos.
Right. One tug on the thread of
Indra's web.
Indra's web. Indra's net, and ripples throughout consciousness, throughout the universe. And however, on the day-to-day, everyday world, it seems like everything is disconnected and not interconnected. People are divided. However, I think these children we are talking about, they are a point of connection, and what we're leading into is a time where there is going to be greater connection with everybody. But we've had to go through this period where it seems very disconnected. And as far as the alien go, most people are totally unaware of it or just dismiss it or ridicule it. But it's really the most important thing going, I mean, if just that larger picture that we're part, that there's civilizations, higher consciousness, and civilizations that have existed millions of years longer than ours, who are coming here, who have a whole total different perspective on things. That we're trying to, the scientists who do have some interest in contacting other worlds, other civilizations through like SETI, they're going from the perspective that there's other people out there who are like us, who are maybe 100 years more in advance. I don't think that's the case. I think these entities that are coming in, they're only partially biological. And the crafts themselves might be partially biological, and actually like in a sense like beings themselves, that like humans that learn to ride horses, that some beings from elsewhere have made contact with these so-called UFOs and have been able to ride them. And so if you look at it in that perspective, things are way beyond where we are.
Yeah. Well, I know. And we've talked to, like, for instance, Thomas Reed, whose abduction experience in Massachusetts resulted in the Historical Society calling it a real incident in the town where it occurred. So, and that was written about a couple of years ago and appeared on the front page of the Boston Globe. Yeah.
Well,
the Reed incident. Yeah, the Reed incident is. It's a lot like. It's a lot like the Betty Hill story, a real experience where they have trace evidence of it happening and so on. And we still, even with the recent disclosure from the government of, this Black Ops spending.
New York Times piece.
Yeah. I think you were mentioning Leslie Kean's piece. We still don't seem to, as a society, ready to evolve to that next level of cosmic consciousness. We still have some resistance.
Yeah. Well, one of the little criteria we use, we test out words and concepts on people at the dog park, since we have 2 dogs. So before we wrote the book on precognition, on sensing the future, Rob and I asked separate people at the dog park, hey, do you know what precognition is? Nobody knew. But when you say the word omen,
premonition.
Or premonition, then they got it. And I think it's the same thing with aliens. ETs belong in movies and in science fiction books. They don't belong in real life. I mean, people know we write about this stuff and they kind of laugh about it, but You know,
But most people, I think, also believe that if there are aliens, they're out in space somewhere at another planet. But there's a greater likelihood, we think, that they're interdimensional. They're right here, but through another dimension. And there's places on the Earth where they can pass through, like the Bermuda Triangle, where there is conditions that open up like
a black hole.
Like a black hole that they can
Time tunnel.
Move through, coming through time and space.
Yeah. So, Rob, you wrote In the Fog about the Bermuda Triangle. Is that kind of what? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have a new book out with the same co-author, Bruce Skirnan, called Beyond the Bermuda Triangle that just came out a couple months ago.
Oh my gosh. We'll have to do
We'll
have to do another whole separate show on that, because these portals of entry and exit on the planet are very fascinating. In fact, you probably already heard this, but the invasion of Iraq, there's a lot of rumors that was about a portal there in the Middle East.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But Bush didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, he did.
He did?
Oh yes, he did.
No
Yep.
kidding.
Yeah, and so a lot of what we have going on is, it's full of secrecies and deception and domination. And if we could get to that next level of consciousness and wake up to this reality of this enormous multidimensional universe of sentient life that we can actively participate in as we go through soul growth and soul evolution, which is the only reason for being alive. Everybody could, get to the next level so much faster. Talk about the afterlife, because that weaves into this whole concept, and you guys have talked so much about that too, the afterlife and how that fits into the whole equation.
Well, we've got a book coming out this summer called Secrets of Spirit Communication, which also grew out of some of our other books that we write about. Like,
are you both mediums? I just wanted to sneak that in.
No, although we both had experiences, and we both had psychic moments.
We both have abilities, but actually Trish is more of the psychic in terms of talking with people. She does it through astrology and tarot, and she does workshops. And when I first met her, she asked me when I was born, where I was born, time, and she didn't know me at all, and she just read me up and down, knew my whole life, and it just blew my mind, because I had, I was somebody who was open to astrology, but I didn't know much about it, and I was somewhat skeptical, because everything you learn in school is that
it's all BS.
Astrology is from the past, and it's something that has been dismissed and overridden by astronomy. But it's a form of divination, and Trish's
it's a good way to read people.
Right, and so she uses it as a tool, as she does with the tarot, and reads people. I do dictionary readings for myself.
These are pretty accurate, though.
I didn't want to get away from Deb's original question, which of course I did when I asked that.
No, I just wanted to hear them talk a little bit about the afterlife. I know that.
Yeah.
They have.
But there are a lot of synchronicities associated with the afterlife. For instance, here's something that happened. In 2000, my mother had been in an Alzheimer's unit for 2 years, and my dad was living with us. And she had, on the day I was supposed to go over to the nursing home to move her into hospice, it was about 5:05, and Rob was at his desk. I was getting ready to leave, and he kind of zoned out, for a minute, and he saw my mother waving goodbye. And not 1 minute later, the nursing home called and said she had just passed away. So there's a case where she communicated with him, as she was leaving.
Yeah, and I teach meditation workshops, and I do a couple, 2 or 3 a year, doing this for years. And one of them, there were a lot of people. There are usually 6-hour sessions that are once a week, and one of them, people were getting some spirit contact with loved ones that had passed. And as the last, as we ended the last session, which was on, I teach a variety of types of meditation and working with chakras and visualization. The last one was on shamanic meditation. And as it ended, just as I closed it, the lights went off in the room, and nobody was standing near the switch at all. And it it was just like there was some entity there that had just
a force. It was the end of the session. It was the end of the workshop. Okay, lights out.
Yeah, and it wasn't that the electricity hadn't gone on, because when we flipped it on, the lights came right back on. It just was the perfect timing of some force, some spirit.
And it could have been one of our parents saying, "Okay, go home."
Yeah. Let's talk for just
synchronicity.
We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to go back to this in the book "Aliens in the Backyard." You have a chapter in there that talks about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction that took place up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, near where Michael lives. And during this experience, Betty actually produced a star map, and it was evaluated by a university professor and many other people. This star map showed trade routes, and it was from the vantage point of Zeta Reticula, and feels like it has authentic value. What did you guys think, talking to Betty about that?
She still claimed that star map was true, that it was accurate. I mean, with Betty, if you go for a walk with Betty, like we did on one of the nights that we were spending together, everything is a possible UFO. But when she talks about her and Barney's abduction experience, that really happened. You can feel it in her voice, in the way she talked about that star map. I mean, she claims it's real. Those are the roots.
I had a friend that did the drawings for the book that she had, and he worked with the hypnotist down at Harvard. He was telling me that one day they became friends because they were jazz fans. He was
John Mack.
I think that's who he was working with. I've got a bunch of the things out of the estate of the artist that indicates that. One day he told me that he was drawing and sketching, and Betty and his wife were out, came back, and when Betty saw them, she just went out on the lawn and walked around in circles. So whatever he'd drawn was really absolutely right on to her.
That must have been interesting for him working with her.
It was. He used to draw something wrong with Barney just to see if how he'd react, and he'd always get mad when he.
Yeah. It was in her later years, was when we met her. It was hard to tell what she was coming up with sometimes, because we were outside and she would point, well, there's one, and I'm thinking I'm seeing an airplane, and she's saying, well, they can take the shape of an airplane,
which may be true, but
we just couldn't tell what was going on.
I do know a person that actually was at her house with a friend of my sister, actually, and there was a couple there, and they were setting in different ways, and she saw her face one time at dusk turn ashen gray, and she looked out the window and saw a small, about a Volkswagen sized ship, and she said, "You must leave now." And so they left. They just went.
Oh my gosh, time is up. I cannot believe it. Trish and Rob, I hope you'll come back and talk more.
We'd love to.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, this is fun.
Another show.
You guys are great.
We'll pick another synchronicity.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you for joining me on my birthday. It was very special.
And happy birthday. Enjoy it.
Happy Earth birthday.
Okay, you got Okay, we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Debbie West on Lost Knowledge on Revolution Radio Studio A. We air every Saturday at 2 p.m. Central Time, and we want to thank Revolution Radio for hosting our show, and also all the people who are listening and supporting Revolution Radio. We also have some wonderful seeds on sale on the homepage, and very happy to accept your donations to help promote all of our wonderful hosts and shows. Today's show is going to be with a guest from Australia. We've brought in Catherine Hand. She is a clinical hypnotherapist, and she obtained her diploma of clinical hypnotherapy and neurolinguistic programming in Australia from the College of Hypnotherapy in Sydney. She's also one of a very few people who's been trained in life between life work with the Newton Institute. She is the co-organizer of the wildly successful consciousness conferences in Australia, very exciting conferences that are gaining popularity in Australia and recognition worldwide. She's also the co-founder of My Children's Past Life, and they are starting a brand new conference on energy and plant medicine healing. So she's a very busy lady, and we're so happy that she took time at a very early hour in Australia to join us today. Welcome to Lost Knowledge, Catherine.
Oh, hi, Deb. Thank you. It's great to be talking to you.
So let's talk for a minute about the work you do as a clinical hypnotherapist. So you do you do past life regressions, and you also do regressions about the life between life with your clients?
Exactly. Yeah. I started off doing past life regression. And of course that led me on to want to do life between life regression. In fact, the whole reason I became a hypnotherapist was because of reading Michael Newton's book, which was Journey of Souls, that for many people has been a profound book, and it was so ahead of its time. Dr. Newton was such a pioneer in this work when his book was released in 1994. So I was actually reading that book and had an incredible moment where I just became very homesick. And as I was reading through his description of the soul world, our immortal home, I was overcome with this desire to go back home. And as I kept, I was just reading. I couldn't put the book down until about 5 o'clock in the morning, when all of a sudden I fell into this incredible. I would say now that it was my body wanting to keep me grounded, because I became so high reading this book and had such a desire to go back to our immortal home, and my body just started to go into a fever. I just started to feel really, really ill, and I got a really high temperature, and yeah, it just sort of grounded me back into my body. But after reading that.
So let's talk about, what is this life between lives? I mean, we know we have an immortal soul, and we, what is this sort of a place that a soul goes to after death? It's immediately after death. Is that right?
Yeah. So in the work that Michael Newton did, he ended up doing about 7,500 case studies. And he had a client who spontaneously went into the life between life state when he suggested that she go back to the source of her problem. And to his complete surprise, because he's a very conservative psychologist, he wasn't a great believer of this type of thing. And to his surprise, she said that she was feeling that she was missing her soul group. And, as he questioned her more, he started to realize that she was talking about heaven, and that might be the way that a lot of people describe it, as heaven or our soul realm or the spirit world. But essentially, it is our permanent home, where our reality is, and that's where we are in between the lives that we're living on Earth or indeed on other planets. So, yeah, it's. I think a lot of people would think of it as heaven, but obviously there's lots of different names for it. What he did was he managed to.
So it's the big unknown, right? So what happens when we die?
Exactly. Yeah, the age-old question, and what he could do is map out a progression of the soul from the time that it leaves the body at the point of death. And this is what was so amazing to read. And you know, over the decades, we've heard lots of descriptions and we get brief glimpses into the afterlife from people who have a near-death experience. And I recently had a near-death experience myself, so I was also able to glimpse it myself from that perspective. And of course, we have mediums and mystics and psychics who will talk about the afterlife. But this was the first body of work that gave us a really extensive look into the afterlife and saw that we have a very structured, very busy, very real life, that we interact with other souls and we continue to do our work and expand and gain knowledge and also to understand the level of incredible love and peace and joy that exists in this realm.
Right. So you mentioned this realm. So what happens then is, in this time of life between lives, we make decisions about our next incarnation, right?
Absolutely.
And what planet we're going to incarnate on, and the reasons why, choose our parents, and that kind of thing. And these are all very, I guess, progressive ideas, right?
Yes.
That this is what we do. But you've also been starting a new project with children's lives, and that's been a hot topic over here in the United States, because we've had a couple of movies and things about these children who come back and insist that they know they had a past life, and they can explain in detail how they died and where they lived, and find out that yes, this is true. Following on the work that Dr. Jim Tucker's been doing in Virginia. Have you how do you feel about this topic? I mean, is it in Australia? Are people you think going to be interested in knowing more about how we can understand our past lives, both adults and children?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because I wrote an article, in fact, a very long article, 5,000 words for New Dawn magazine, and it was about children's past lives. And I had been watching a show called it's got a funny name. I don't know if this is exactly right, but I think it's Ghost Within My Child. Have you seen that one?
No.
Yeah, it's a show called Ghost Within My Child, but it's actually about children who have spontaneous past life recall, and they follow the child and do research about the past life, a lot like Dr. Ian Stevenson did, and Jim Tucker's now taken over. And they follow that child back to that past life and meet their family if possible, or at least take them back to the place where they lived when they were that past person. And the healing that comes from that experience is quite overwhelming to the child, and it often allows them to let go of the past life memories and they move on. So it's really fascinating to me. After writing that article and interviewing Dr. Jim Tucker, it really prompted me to want to look into what happens in Australia with our past life, our past life lineage, because with all of the work that Dr. Ian Stevenson started up with the Department of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, he was working in countries like Burma and India and Sri Lanka and Turkey, where their culture accepts reincarnation as a very common thing. So in places like America and Australia, where culturally we don't have such a strong belief in reincarnation, there hasn't been as much work done because a lot of parents aren't very willing to actually consider that their child could be having past life memories. So when I was interviewing Dr. Tucker and he was explaining some of the statistics, because they've now databased about 3,000 studies now that Dr. Stevenson commenced, and they're starting to look for patterns. And in much the same way that Dr. Newton did with his work, and he databased it very meticulously, this is what Dr. Tucker's team are now doing. And they're going to go back and look through all the patterns and see that, the really high percentage of children that have their past life recall end up being reborn in the place where they died in their past life. So it's really interesting, and it got me to think, well, does that same thing happen in Australia? In Australia, we've got a very young history. We've only been around for a couple of hundred years, certainly in terms of the white man. So I haven't had a whole lot of clients in my work that have Australian past lives. They're typically in America or in the UK more often. So Mick and myself kind of thought, okay, well, let's start to get some information together and try and collate this and see whether there's, with children that are talking about past lives and having those memories occur spontaneously when they're very young, let's start to see if we can map out a history of our past life lineage as a country. So, yeah, we're really keen to hear from Australian parents who have their children talk about it. But, of course, a lot of people aren't always very open to it, so it can be quite a difficult thing.
Yeah, well, we're cracking that egg. A little bit at a time. I want to talk about the Cosmic Consciousness Expos because they're wildly successful. You started them, I think, has it been like 5 years since?
Yeah, we're coming up to our fifth year. So
yeah. And so there's the Cosmic Consciousness Expo, the Afterlife Explorers Conference, and the new Plant and Energy Medicine Expo. For the Cosmic Consciousness Expo.
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful, yeah. I want to talk about the concept of multiple dimensions and how the extraterrestrials are from these dimensions and other planets and star systems, and then their role in our evolution of consciousness. Because right now we are going through this, monumental, as you know, disclosure about the multidimensional universe and the sentient life all around us existing in multiple dimensions and different realities. Can you explain it in your own words, and because you've been doing this conference for a while and have so many great speakers, and try to sort of simplify it a little bit and tell people what's going on,
Yeah, well, to simplify it, that's the tricky bit. And this is why we get the incredible speakers that we do, because they have such a knack at being able to essentially break down what is such a hard concept for us to get our human brain wrapped around. And particularly when we've been, so much has been hidden, for a very long time. And but certainly just in my own very basic understanding, and what prompted us to, because our first conference, it might help if I just start with our own, the progression of our own journey. I'm talking about Mick and myself. Mick Turner is my co-organizer, and we started with the Afterlife Explorers Conference. So at that point, we were extremely interested. Mick had a near-death experience himself, and he had drowned. So he was very interested in exploring. He had understood firsthand that there's no such thing as death, that when you die, your consciousness lives on. So that was where we started. And of course, with my interest in past lives and life between lives, it was perfect for me to explore further. And we then progressed into understanding more about the ET consciousness. And we had a lady by the name of Mary Rodwell, who you would know very well. And she came to our conference and started talking about children who were having, again, spontaneous life recall, but they were having recall of their off-planet lifetimes. And they were remembering themselves in living in other planets or on other planets and having very different skill sets and different abilities that they were now bringing into this life and this planet to be able to help humanity. And of course, we refer to those children as star seeds, and they're bringing incredible knowledge through. So with our discovery and stepping more into this area, it really opened us up to wanting to find out more ourselves. And as we expanded on our own journey, it brought us to the cosmic consciousness side of things. And we started to discover that for ourselves, we were remembering more and more of our own galactic heritage, and we had an incredible healing. One day, a healer, a sound healer, actually contacted us, and she didn't know anything about us, but she'd been very drawn to connect with us, and she did a healing for us that she was doing at a time. She said, look, I'll do a healing for you, and I'll record it and I'll send it to you. So we didn't know when that healing was going to occur. And I was working at my computer, and all of a sudden, Deb, I just had what I can only describe as like a cork. It flew off the top of my head, and all of a sudden this incredible outpouring of grief, just immense sadness and emotion just poured out of me, like I could feel it coming out the top of my head. And this went on for about 15 or 20 minutes, and I didn't know what had hit me. I didn't know what was happening. I'd never had anything like that occur before. And eventually it sort of subsided, but I felt really woozy. I wasn't completely in my body. And then sometime after that, I got a phone call from this healer, and she said to me, I've just done your healing. I've recorded it for you and Mick, and I'm going to send it to you. And when you can, listen to it. And it dawned on me that this cork, this outpouring of emotion, release of emotion, had obviously occurred while she was doing her healing, unbeknown to me at the time. So Mick and I then listened. He was actually at waiting to pick up his daughter. I think she was at ballet or something like that. So he was waiting to pick up his daughter. So he was listening to the recording at the same time that I was listening to the recording. And we both just were in this state of awe as we were listening to this healing and the things that were happening to us and the memories that were starting to open up. And what we started to remember was our lifetime that we'd had on a planet called Moldek. And Moldek exploded. And what I was recovering or releasing was the grief of this planet exploding. And during meditations that I did subsequently, I started to have really strong visions. And it started off very carefully. I think my subconscious was trying to protect me from the memories. And I started to see myself like I was watching myself from behind. And I was in a craft and I could see the planet explode. And I was with Mick. And at first I thought it was just the two of us, but then later on, as I did further meditations, I could see that there were quite a few of us in this craft, and we were moving away from the planet as the planet exploded. And Mick and I have both had memories of that now. And so this memory that opened up and the abilities that we had on that planet and the things that we did all started to then come flooding in. And it was such a homecoming in a sense, because I think it's like any time you discover a little bit about your roots, it gives you a greater sense of who you are and a greater sense of what makes you the person that you are. So to be able to discover your galactic heritage is really powerful, and it really changed both of us, and it really brought us into our own power and gave us a really strong perspective of who we are and what we're here to do. And so we realized that it was really, really important for everyone to have this, cosmic awareness and this cosmic consciousness to be able to develop their own purpose and mission and why they're here on this planet at the time. Because, as we all know, this is an incredible time and a massive time of transformation. So for souls to have a body on Earth at this time is a privilege, and we want to make the most of it. We want to be able to help humanity move on and move into that cosmic consciousness. So that was our personal journey that we took to come to the point where we created the Cosmic Consciousness Conference. And of course we felt really, really drawn to do it at a very special place. And Uluru is such a sacred site. It's so iconic. It's the solar plexus chakra for the earth. So it's very much about your own power. And when we're out there in January running the conference, the healing that comes up and the transformation that happens for people at a very deep level, right down there in the solar plexus, and it's all about power. So very intense healing was occurring. And, Uluru, a lot of people, of course, know Uluru, this huge, great big rock. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it's actually a jewel site. And Uluru is also paired up with Katajuta. And Katajuta is a whole series of great big rocks. So together they are this huge big library of information that has been collecting information about this planet since it began. And a lot of people feel that the Pleiadians seeded the Earth through this rock, this piece of rock that's embedded down into the earth like a huge big arrow or like a big iceberg, and most of it is actually under the surface of the ground. So for those that believe that the Pleiadians seeded Earth, and that prior to that it was just a big sort of chunk of molten rock floating around, and the Pleiadians actually seeded it with life, and that came through with Katajuta and Uluru. So it's quite an amazing place to be at, to hold the kind of conference that we hold. The energy of the rock and the energy of the people is pretty profound and very transformational. So it's exciting.
So you said this is a very important time of transformation on this planet Earth. Are we in danger of blowing ourselves up?
We are. That's my belief, and I think that's why a lot of Moldekians have returned, and a lot of other souls. We've been through it before, and I have found that when I'm talking with people about Moldek, if they feel that they've lived on that planet in another life, a lot of emotion comes up, and typically they have had a lot of feelings throughout this lifetime of just a quiet anxiety of something going to go wrong, and this sort of sense of pending doom. And they get quite emotional as they start to understand the history of Moldek. And again, the same as for me, a lot of grief will come up for them. So stepping into that and being able to uncover it is very healing, because it has been very deeply suppressed for our own benefit, to keep us protected from reliving that type of grief. Because can you imagine, like, when you think about it, seeing your whole planet blow up, or being involved in it and actually being on the planet when it blew up, is just monumental loss. So,
and a lot of us here had lives during the destruction, the Atlantean destruction.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we're all here from different timelines of disaster, hoping for a new outcome.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
I think that Marduk is the asteroid belt now, right? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And this, from what I'm understanding, and I wanted to ask you about it because these ETs are coming from many dimensions, many star systems, many galaxies. Andromeda, our nearby galaxy, which we're going to be merging with in the future, and for all the same purpose, right? For the elevation of our consciousness, for partaking in this journey with us, collaborating with us in that multidimensional way, because aspects of ourselves that are here on this earth plane during this time period, so to speak, or in a multidimensional realm, participating in all of these things simultaneously. Is that, I mean, it's kind of a hard concept to put into words, but when you think about the fact that Marduk was destroyed, it's all, there's no linear time in actuality. So it's all part of the now moment, right?
Exactly. And I think that's the hardest thing for us as humans to understand, because we're so conditioned to have the understanding of linear time. But certainly when I take my clients into the life between life state, they seem to have a common description would be that when they're choosing what life they go into, not only are they choosing the life, but they're choosing the time frame, the period of history that they're choosing to incarnate. But in actual fact, it's all running at the same time. So it's almost like when you walk into an electronics shop and you're seeing all the TV screens, there might be 50 TV screens and they're all playing different stations. And it's a bit like that as a soul. We can look at all these different opportunities and different choices and say, okay, I'm going to be a human on planet Earth at the time of at this time, but it's all happening at the same time. And so it's very much about what do we need to do to develop our own soul and for our own soul to expand, the lessons that we need to go through, but also what are we going to do to help that particular part of time, and what are we doing to help in this case humanity. So a lot of us who have incarnated at this time are here to be able to help humanity to ascend with the planet. So it's really important that we start to open up to that and do what we have to do, because we've got so many different roles. I had a client who her role to come into this lifetime was to actually work with stopping and helping to remove the entities that aren't meant to be here at this time.
Oh, good.
So yeah, we've all got our different parts to play, and yeah, thank goodness we are being helped by some of these other races, and there's so many of them, and so many of them are all about service, and that's what we need to go with now. We need to open up to that and start to communicate with them and start to get a sense that we're not just a little isolated, rock on the outer edges. We're going to be part of this greater community, and that's what we need to really open up to now. We need to take the taboo nature of this subject away and help people to open up to it. I think people intuitively have a feeling that there's so much more. And when we talk to people, and you might get some, really big, gruff truckie or something who would never, ever want to admit to his mates down at the pub that he believes in UFOs or he believes in ETs. But, when you actually have a really good conversation with them, so many people do. It's just that because of the conditioning that we've had, through all the government shutting it down and wanting to keep it quiet, people just get ridiculed and mocked, and as people get killed and jailed and discredited. So of course people don't want to really admit it, but the more that we talk about it and the more that we discuss it in a really rational and intellectual way, people can start to open up to it themselves and have that memory triggered for them.
Right. But I want to talk about at the Cosmic Consciousness Expo at one point, did you have Laura Eisenhower as a guest, as a speaker?
We did. We had...
She's amazing, and she's been on my radio show too. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about what she has to say, because I think she's one of those sort of bold, brave warrior type souls here to really break the silence. And she's, I think, doing a great job. So tell us a little bit about her.
Yeah, well, Laura, Laura can talk and talk and talk. She hardly draws breath, and her information that she brings out is incredible. She started off talking a lot about the Greada Treaty, and that was really fascinating to people to hear about the treaty that her great grandfather signed, and
her great grandfather President Eisenhower. And the Greada Treaty that he allegedly signed with the alien greys, and how that still impacts on us all these years later, and it is re-signed every 10 years. So she was talking about that, and of course talking about so what is kind of the treaty entail?
Well, we don't really know for sure, but it seems like that it involved exchanging information. So, whatever information that they had or technology that they had, there was definitely some sort of treaty signed that the government was able to get that technology and keep it and use it for themselves. And back then, the American government would have wanted to keep that for themselves. They wouldn't have wanted anyone, like the Russians, to get their hands on it. So from that point on, everything had to be very, very quiet and very hushed up, because they wanted to keep it secret. They wanted the technology for themselves. So in exchange for this technology, they were allowing for some human abductions for experiments. Exactly.
Genetic experiments, right? And so that's one of the things that needs to come right out into the open, because it's very important for us to acknowledge and move forward and do whatever needs to be done to to put these kinds of secrecy programs to shed light on them and put them in our past, because everyone needs to be awake to their own evolutionary journey, and participation in a program such as that may be part of your journey, but it needs to be something we can openly discuss.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is what everyone's talking about. And people like Laura, she was saying that she'd love to get into the White House and talk to Trump and say we've got to stop this treaty. But essentially, I think people like Laura and a lot of our other speakers, people like James Bartley, who say that disclosure is never going to come from the government. So it always has to be, we have to start it. We have to be the ones that open it up. And eventually they can't, eventually if we're all talking about it and we're all looking into it, we can't all be, kept in the dark about it. We can't all be made to be quiet. So it has to be something that we keep working on and keep talking about. And remembering, it brings up a lot of fear when you start to talk about these subjects with people. It can bring up a tremendous amount of fear and helplessness and powerlessness. So the great thing about Laura is that although she talks a lot about the negative agenda and what's going on and the ways in which we're being harmed by it, she also talks about the fact that we are sovereign beings, and ultimately we have the power, and we have, by keeping our vibration high, by being in a state of love, by being the best that we can be and stepping into this cosmic consciousness, we can't be harmed, we can't be kept down, and we can break out of this negative agenda and break out of the loop. And so, yeah, she was a very powerful presenter, and all of our people, at the conference just loved what she had to say. So, and she's not afraid. She's had all sorts of terrible things happen to try and discredit her, and she had her brakes cut on her car not long before she came out to our conference. So she's dealing with a lot, and she's only young, so she's to be coping with what she's going through, and to keep on doing it when on those days. And we feel like that too sometimes. There are days that we also get psychic attack and we have sabotage and things like that, because I think anytime you're a light worker trying to spread the light around, there will be someone on the dark side that wants to close you down. And so, we know how it feels as well, but she deals with it a lot more than we do, obviously, because she's so out there and so public. So she's quite brave, and we just love the fact that she keeps doing what she needs to do, and helping people to get a sense of their own sovereignty.
So, getting back to this, sort of the afterlife expo, how do you think that really ties into this whole ET phenomenon? Because really, the two are so interrelated. I know that you had I think Bob Davis from the Free Group talk about consciousness and about how important it is to integrate the two, and it can't just be there's UFOs and ETs without talking about our consciousness, right? It's
absolutely. I mean, they're so interwoven, and in fact, we now combine our Afterlife Explorers Conference with our Close Encounters Conference, because you can't really have a separation between the two. I mean, at the end of the day, everything is energy. We're all souls. So whether we're living our life on planet Earth and we're having a human incarnation, or whether we're living on, a totally different planet and we're a different race, we're still souls. We're still functioning with our families, with a life. We're here to learn things and grow. So we're all the same, whether we're one race or another, whether we're human or alien, we're still living in the universe. And this is what, Bob Davis and the work that they're doing at Free keeps showing this up. All the studies that they're doing keep showing up that people who have this contact, their spiritual abilities and their psychic abilities and their soul awareness keeps opening up for them. And far from the contact experience being really, really negative, as Hollywood would want us to believe, and that fear factor to be reinforced, in fact, they would never change it. The people that have that contact all the time and have had it often since they were a child, they don't regret it, because although it can feel scary because they're having contact with beings that they didn't know existed, it's a shock and it's a surprise to them, but ultimately they usually feel that it's a positive influence in their life, and it connects them in with that spiritual understanding and a greater awareness of our universe and our souls and how it's all connected. So yeah, you can't separate it. It's all totally interconnected.
Yeah, I think that's what's so beautiful about the fact that you have both of these going on simultaneously, and you're studying the work of somebody like Brian Weiss and energy medicine, the Barbara Brennan type thing, because these are all things that come together to produce this new paradigm. So the paradigms that we exist in right now, the field of medicine and the history and our geopolitical system, all of those have to shift into this higher dimension as Earth ascends into the fifth dimension. So, you can't isolate pockets of details about who we are and in ancient history site. Although there's some wonderful ones even in Australia that talk about past cultures. I think bringing it all together is so unique and different about explaining it. We have a lot of conferences here in the United States about UFO contact, but they just end up debating different episodes of contact and different government cover-ups. And it doesn't progress anywhere. I watched it for 5 years. Never really attended very many of them, but they don't seem to progress.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Right?
It's the same in Australia. And, people can just get very stuck on, on all, as they say, the nuts and bolts of it. And we want our conferences to be really transformational. We want people not to just have an exchange of knowledge and information. We want it to transform them. We want them to come away having had an experience that they've never had before, and to be able to feel that they've really grown and they've seen another aspect of themselves. And that's what's really important to us, because you can't just, worry about, if you just get stuck in the 3D elements of looking into different types of craft or whatever. It's just, what's the point? You have to be able to use this information in a way that actually will help you, help you transcend the 3D. And everyone is starting to realize that you can't just have your life compartmentalized. It's all interconnected. And even now, with our move into the health consciousness, it's still connected, because again, for us to be able to really move into this 5D, this cosmic consciousness, we have to be the best that we can be. And if our bodies are being really held back by all the fluoride, that calcifies our pineal gland and blocks us, and if our bodies are being affected by the poisons in the chemtrails and the GMO food and the vaccines and all of this, that's all happening to stop us from thriving and to keep us dumbed down and to keep us out of our higher self. And so everything is interrelated. And so even with our move into the health consciousness side of things, that is connected as well. It's connected to us being the best that we can be, so that we can, be open to our psychic abilities and our intuition, and to be able to receive information from ETs and from our higher selves and our guides and everything like that. So you can't separate it, Deb. You're exactly right. It's ultimately, this is what we're moving towards. Everything is moving to that point where we can't keep functioning the way that that we are, where everyone's hopping in their car at 7:30 in the morning and going to work in an office and coming back at 7 o'clock at night and being so exhausted and drained that they have nothing else to give. They can't live their purpose and live their mission and start to do what they're meant to do. And that's the negative agenda that we've got to be a step ahead of it. We've got to get really healthy. We've got to eat organic. We've got to say no to the vaccines. We've got to find a way to detox out the poisons from the chemtrails. And I myself was diagnosed with breast cancer a year ago. And of course, it was devastating. It was horrible when I discovered that I had breast cancer, and a tremendous amount of fear came up, of course, and it still does at times. But ultimately, I'm realizing that I'm lucky, because it got me to move into a place of total health. And the day before I was scheduled to have the double mastectomy, I just couldn't go ahead with it. It was like every cell in my body was saying, no way, there's got to be a better way. Just cutting off your boobs is, surely not a solution to this. And I certainly didn't want to have chemotherapy. I mean, there was no way that I was going to do that. So, thank goodness I just listened to my body's wisdom and I said no. And in fact, I didn't ring the hospital. I was too chicken. So my sister rang and cancelled the operation. And of course I got sort of almost stalked by the oncologist and the staff at the hospital who kept, ringing and saying that I was going to die if I didn't have this operation. And, but I have gone down such an incredible path now, and I've become, I became vegan, which is amazing. And more people are becoming vegan. They want the plant consciousness. They want the spirit medicine of plants in their body. They don't want the death consciousness of animals, that have been slaughtered in their bodies. And so, the more that we become really healthy and our body can be receptive and we can be a step ahead of the negative agenda, it's helping us to become the higher beings and that we really are, and to have that sort of heaven on earth connection that we're all hoping for.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I want to, for the little bit of time we have left, I want to talk about ascension. It's been a topic on this show for a couple of years now, and I want to get your take on it. How are we doing in terms of, helping people understand ascension, and how do you feel about what's actually taking place? I think it's fabulous. All of these star nations coming to Earth, either in human bodies or in light bodies, and supporting us through this ascension that many of them have already experienced, Sirius being one of them. I mean, it's just fabulous, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that when you're on this path, and one of the things that I hear so often is that people get really frustrated when they can see their friends and their family around them that aren't waking up and aren't going down the same path with them, and they find it really frustrating that they're still so asleep and they just don't seem to care. And I think that's the hard part for us when we look around at our loved ones and our family, and we can see and we want to shake them and say, wake up. But it's not everyone's journey, and that's, I think, a big lesson for us all, that not everyone is going to go on this path, and it is really difficult. Again, it's one of those other things that we can't get our head around. My 10-year-old son was saying to me, well, when we ascend, do we keep our bodies, or do we get new bodies, or do we have no bodies? And and some of those like practicalities are really hard, and I don't think we really know the answers to them. All we know is that when we move into that state where we understand the sense of our immortality and the incredible co-creative souls that we are, we don't have to be stuck in this paradigm of needing the money and the jobs and all the fear, and we move into a place where we're living from our heart, and we're actually living in a soul state but in a physical form. And that's my take on it. And so the more that we do that and keep making our choices constantly from our heart, and every day waking up and choosing to, I think we have this default setting, and it's almost like every day you've got to wake up and go for gold again. You've got to keep training yourself to follow your heart and be in that place of love, and then you can't go wrong. When you're totally guided by your heart and you have a deep faith that your soul will guide you, you can't actually do anything wrong. You can't make a mistake. There's a peace that comes with that, and that's what you've got to, that's what we're all working towards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I want to I didn't mention this in the beginning of the interview, but the fact that you came from 15 years in the global banking industry and then made this life change, a lot of us have done that. A lot of us have, during the awakening, have gone from one career, one personality, one experience to something quite different, which is also very amazing. Yeah, very amazing.
Oh, it's so
like a wake
funny.
up. Yeah. But
know,
also, I wanted to say to you, we're doing a meditation. A lot of times I have this experience where I go to what I call Agartha. And Agartha, to me, is a fifth dimensional experience. A lot of people talk about it, from people that visit Mount Shasta or, Tibet or other places. And this place of living through your heart, where all of the lower chakras have been released. You no longer live in the third dimension. That place is something that keeps me going. That vision of what that life is like for me, anyway. I just wondered if you'd ever had that experience of of visiting Agartha and a real. It's still a human experience, so to speak.
Yes.
It's not a off-world experience in not in a body. So it's, to me, it's I think it's been showing me what that fifth dimensional experience feels like.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have glimpses of that in meditations as well. It is like a paradise, and I feel too that was what Moldek was like. It was an absolute paradise, and we had these incredible abilities and skills, and so we're bringing all of those back now, and we're remembering all those different aspects of who we are. So I don't have. I think the closest I had a near-death experience about 6 months ago, as I was going through this healing journey, and going down the natural path of healing. I have had a healing crisis, and you hear that a healing crisis can kill you, and I did. I was that close to death that I had this experience where I woke up in the early hours of the morning, and I was very aware that I was dying, and but at the same, on the other hand, I kept thinking, no, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. I'll go back to sleep, and I'll wake up, and I'll be fine. And I did go back into some sort of a sleep or altered state, and then I woke up again, and it was about 7:30 in the morning, and I had to call my son and say, like, I'm really not very good. I didn't know if I was having a stroke. I didn't know if my words would come out of my mouth. I didn't know if my body could do what I was, my brain was telling it to do. But I was just aware that I was going to die. And at that point, all I thought is, I need to get Mick here, because I didn't want to die and leave my son, be dying while my son was there on his own. And Mick was driving his son to school. And so Mick, my son called Mick and said, Mummy's really, really bad. You need to come. And of course, it was peak hour traffic. I was still thinking, oh no, this is terrible timing for him. He's got to, get back through peak hour traffic. I mean, the things that we our brain will put us through. But he arrived back and, of course, thought that I was dying, and he sat with his mother only about 6 weeks before and held her hand as she was dying, and he thought, God, I can't believe I'm going through this again. And he sat there holding my hand, and he actually recorded me, because he thought these are going to be the last words that he'll ever hear me talk about. But and of course he called my parents over and my sister. And so as my whole family is around me thinking that I'm about to die, for me, even though I was like so physically weak and I couldn't even pick up a glass of water, Mick just had to hold a glass to my mouth and give me a sip of water every now and again. But in my other state, I was off on a beautiful journey, and I could see this beautiful bubble, and I said to Mick, I can see a beautiful bubble, and it exists just on the other side of the veil. So there you are having a beautiful afterlife experience that you can share with us now, and with your wonderful conferences arranged for many people to come together and have these experiences. So Catherine Hand, I want to thank you. I'm so sorry that we're out of time. Have to have you come back soon. You're welcome.
Expos you can find online, Catherine Hand, and also Past Life Regression Therapy. If you're interested, contact her through her website. So thank you so much, Catherine.
You're welcome, Deb.